Chapter 1. The stranger in the cafe. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the tall windows of the small cafe, casting golden patterns across the polished wooden tables. Isabella Romano sat alone at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, savoring the calm before the day took over with its usual bustle. The scent of freshly baked pastries mixed with the faint aroma of espresso, filling the air with a comforting warmth. Outside, the city hummed with life as people hurried past, oblivious to the quiet world inside the cafe. Isabella's gaze wandered across the room, taking in the casual chatter of strangers and the gentle clink of cups and plates. It was her favorite time of day, a few quiet moments stolen for herself before work and responsibilities demanded her attention. She noticed him then, seated at a table across the room, a man who seemed oddly out of place yet entirely composed. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp and attentive, observing the cafe with an almost imperceptible intensity. For reasons she could not name, Isabella felt a strange pull toward him, a sense of familiarity she could not explain. She told herself it was nothing and returned her attention to the swirl of cream in her coffee. But the feeling lingered, like a whisper at the edge of her thoughts. The man rose and moved closer, not in a way that threatened, but in a way that made her heart quicken for reasons she could not understand. He smiled briefly at the barista, then looked back toward her, his expression unreadable but compelling. Isabella's fingers tightened around her cup as she tried to ignore him, yet she could not shake the sensation that her life was about to shift in ways she had never imagined. Her thoughts were interrupted when a breeze drifted in from the open door, carrying the sounds of the city and a faint scent of leather and something faintly floral. She shivered slightly and drew her sweater closer around her shoulders. When she looked up again, the man had returned to his table, but his gaze remained fixed on her. Isabella's curiosity baffled with her caution, and though she wanted to look away, she could not. Something about him called to her, though she did not yet know why. The cafe seemed to shrink around them as moments passed in quiet observation. Isabella felt the subtle shift in the air, the tension of unseen stories waiting to be told. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present, and she glanced at the screen, grateful for the interruption. Yet even as she typed a quick reply to her friend, she could feel his eyes on her, steady and unrelenting. The sensation was unsettling and strangely comforting all at once. Isabella left the cafe eventually, the bell above the door chiming softly behind her. She walked down the busy streets, replaying the encounter in her mind, trying to make sense of the pull she had felt. The city moved around her in a blur of faces and sounds, but she could not shake the thought of the man with the intense eyes and the quiet confidence. There was a story behind them, a presence that seemed larger than life yet intimately personal, and Isabella knew, deep down, that their paths were meant to cross again, unbeknownst to her. Lorenzo Vitale, the powerful Don who had observed her from across the room, felt the same unspoken pull. He had watched her with careful attention, noting the grace in her movements and the warmth in her laughter, qualities that no one in his dangerous world had possessed. He had been searching for answers, for a piece of his life that had long been missing, and in that quiet cafe, he had found a hint of it in the woman who walked unaware of the destiny that linked them together. As Isabella disappeared into the city streets, Lorenzo allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Something in her presence stirred a long-forgotten part of him, a part that longed for connection and for something pure in a world filled with shadows and secrets. The morning air was crisp and full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, he felt the faintest hope that perhaps fate had finally begun to weave a story either of them could ignore. Chapter 2. Shadows of the past. Lorenzo Vitale returned to his private study, the weight of his responsibilities pressing heavily on his shoulders. The office was dimly lit, with the golden glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the polished mahogany furniture. Shelves lined with leather-bound books and family records surrounded him, but his attention was drawn to a folder that had arrived that morning, one he had been hesitant to open. The contents were delicate, the sort of information that could change the course of lives, and as he reviewed the carefully written reports, a single truth struck him with both shock and fascination. Somewhere, hidden in plain sight, was an heir he had never known, a piece of his life that had been concealed for years. The thought of a long-lost family member stirred memories he had tried to bury, memories of trust betrayed, alliances formed in secrecy, and decisions made out of necessity rather than desire. The Vitale family had always been one of power, loyalty, and careful control, yet the existence of an heir he did not know threatened to unravel the carefully constructed world he had built. His mind raced with questions. Who was this person? Where had they been all these years? Could they be trusted? Or was their presence a trap set by rivals seeking to weaken the family? Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, Isabella Romano moved through her own morning routine with a sense of unease she could not explain. The memory of the stranger in the cafe lingered in her thoughts, his intense gaze leaving a mark on her mind that she could not dismiss. There was something familiar about him, yet when she tried to place it, the thought slipped away, leaving only the impression of something important, something just beyond her reach. She shook her head and smiled softly, telling herself she was letting imagination run too far. Still, a small part of her wondered if fate had begun nudging her toward a path she was not yet ready to walk. Throughout the day, Lorenzo's mind remained restless. He retraced the clues he had uncovered, moving cautiously through the web of his family's history. He visited old associates, consulted discreetly with advisors, and reviewed photographs and records that spanned decades. Each detail he uncovered only strengthened the sense that Isabella might indeed be the hidden piece of his life, the one connection he had been searching for without even realizing it. Yet he could not act impulsively. The revelation required careful planning, delicate steps, and the certainty that the timing was right. Isabella, unaware of the attention she had drawn, went about her day with her characteristic charm and focus. At work, her colleagues noticed a quiet distraction in her demeanor, a soft tension beneath her usual confidence. She brushed it off as fatigue, yet when she caught herself glancing at the door, half expecting the stranger from the cafe to appear, a shiver of anticipation ran down her spine. Something was stirring in the city, in her life, though she could not yet name it, and it left her with a restless energy that made her both anxious and strangely alive. As night fell, Lorenzo finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. The city lights glimmered through the large windows of his study, painting the streets in gold and shadow. He considered the life of the woman he had glimpsed that morning, the warmth in her presence, the spark of kindness and courage that stood out in a world often clouded by fear and manipulation. If she was indeed his heir, then she was more than a name or a title. She was a person with hopes, dreams, and a heart that might one day change everything he had known. He leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet of the night envelop him, and allowed himself a rare thought of hope. The discovery of Isabella's existence marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with questions, possibilities, and perhaps, if he could navigate the delicate path ahead, a bond that neither of them had anticipated. The shadows of the past were stirring, and soon, their lives would be intertwined in ways neither could ignore. Chapter 3. An unexpected connection. The late afternoon sun cast long, warm beams across the busy streets as Isabella hurried toward the bookstore she frequented on the edge of the city. Her mind wandered back to the cafe, to the stranger whose presence lingered in her thoughts like a half-forgotten melody. She tried to focus on the errands of the day, the familiar routine of books and quiet corners, yet every glance over her shoulder made her heart beat a little faster. As if expecting him to appear, Lorenzo walked briskly through the crowded square, careful to maintain a low profile. He had been following a trail of information, a path that had led him closer to Isabella without revealing his intentions. He did not intend to frighten her or rush the revelation, but the pull toward her was undeniable. As he turned a corner, their paths collided near the entrance of the bookstore. Isabella's hands instinctively clutched the straps of her bag, and for a brief moment, time seemed to pause. "I'm so sorry," she said, stepping back slightly, her voice both nervous and apologetic. Lorenzo smiled gently, a warmth in his eyes that contrasted with the hard exterior the world had taught him to wear. "No harm done," he replied. His voice carried a quiet authority, yet it was soft enough to ease the sudden tension that had gripped her. There was something familiar in the way he spoke, a cadence that tugged at a memory she could not place. They moved through the doorway together, the bell above chiming softly. Isabella felt an unusual calm, a sense that this encounter was meant to happen, though she had no understanding why. Lorenzo observed her closely, without imposing, noting the graceful way she adjusted her coat and the subtle nervous flicker in her eyes. He had to remind himself that he could not reveal too much, that patience was necessary if she was to understand the truth in time. Browsing the shelves, their shoulders brushed occasionally, sending small sparks of awareness through Isabella that she could not explain. Lorenzo suggested a title, something innocuous, and she accepted with a smile that lingered longer than necessary. Words were exchanged carefully, their conversation light but meaningful, a thread of connection weaving silently between them. Isabella felt drawn to him in a way that unsettled her, a magnetic pull that went beyond reason or familiarity. As the afternoon waned, shadows lengthened across the worn wooden floor of the bookstore. They spoke of ordinary things at first, books, the city, the small joys of daily life, but the unspoken tension between them grew, an invisible current that neither could ignore. Lorenzo found himself listening intently to her laughter, the cadence of her speech, and the moments when her eyes lit up with quiet passion. Every detail was etched into his mind, a collection of pieces that might one day form a complete picture he longed to show her. When Isabella finally prepared to leave, Lorenzo walked her to the door, careful not to overstep. "I hope I see you again," he said quietly, letting the words carry more weight than casual politeness. Isabella hesitated, feeling the same inexplicable pull. "I think we will," she replied, though she could not explain why she believed it. She stepped into the fading sunlight, her mind racing with thoughts of the man who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere and yet felt so essential. Lorenzo watched her disappear into the crowd, a strange mix of anticipation and protectiveness stirring within him. He knew their connection had begun, delicate and fragile, yet impossible to ignore. This encounter, though seemingly ordinary, was the first step toward a future neither of them fully understood, but both would soon feel inescapably real. Chapter 4. Secrets Unveiled. Evening air was cool and fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers as Isabella walked through the quiet streets, her mind still buzzing with the encounter at the bookstore. Every step seemed heavier, as though invisible threads were pulling her towards something she could not yet see. She replayed the conversation in her mind, the ease with which Lorenzo had spoken, the subtle warmth in his eyes, and the unsettling sense that she had known him far longer than mere minutes. The city around her seemed to blur into a muted backdrop, leaving only the lingering presence of the stranger who had captured her thoughts so completely. Lorenzo, meanwhile, sat in his study, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating folders and photographs spread before him. He had spent the day watching her from a distance, piecing together her life with a careful attention, born from years of experience and instinct. Every detail, from the way she carried herself to the small routines she had, mattered. He knew it was time to reveal a part of the truth, not all at once, but enough to prepare her for the reality he could no longer conceal. The Vitale family was a world of power, loyalty, and danger, and Isabella needed to understand at least the edges of it before the weight of the full truth became unavoidable. The next day, he invited her to a quiet gallery opening, a neutral space where they could speak without interference. Isabella hesitated at first, sensing an importance she could not yet name, but curiosity and the inexplicable draw toward him overcame her caution. She arrived to find Lorenzo already waiting, his presence commanding yet strangely reassuring. He greeted her with a subtle nod, and for a moment, the noise of the city seemed to fall away, leaving only the gravity of their shared silence. As they walked through the gallery, Lorenzo began to speak carefully, revealing pieces of the Vitale family history. He spoke of loyalty and responsibility, of power that could both protect and destroy, and of the careful balance required to navigate a world filled with both allies and enemies. Isabella listened intently, her mind struggling to reconcile the man she had met in the cafe and the bookstore with the figure he now presented, a man of influence and authority whose life carried complexities she had never imagined. At first, disbelief clouded her thoughts. How could someone so seemingly ordinary have such an extraordinary and dangerous life? How could he be tied to a world she had only glimpsed in news stories and whispered rumors? Yet alongside the fear, a sense of belonging began to take root, subtle but undeniable. The more Lorenzo spoke, the more she sensed that her connection to him was not a coincidence. There was history here, unseen yet tangible, and she felt herself standing on the edge of a revelation that would reshape her understanding of family, loyalty, and her own identity. As the evening drew to a close, Lorenzo walked her to the door of her apartment. The streetlights cast long reflections on the pavement, and the city felt unusually quiet, almost expectant. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said softly, his voice carrying a careful mixture of authority and tenderness. "But there are truths you need to understand, and I want to guide you through them safely." Isabella looked up at him, uncertainty and curiosity mingling in her gaze. "I want to understand," she admitted, the words heavier than they seemed. She felt the weight of her own courage, of the decision to step willingly into a world that was both alluring and dangerous. Lorenzo allowed himself a small, rare smile, a flicker of hope that her strength would carry them through the challenges ahead. "Then we will face it together," he said. And in that moment, the invisible thread that had connected them from the beginning felt stronger, more tangible, as if the universe itself had aligned to bring them to this point. As she entered her apartment and closed the door behind her, Isabella could not shake the sense that her life had shifted irreversibly. The city outside continued in its familiar rhythm, but inside her, a quiet storm of anticipation, fear, and hope swirled, marking the beginning of a journey that would change everything she thought she knew about love, family, and destiny. Chapter 5. The hidden earth. Morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Vitale estate, filling the grand room with a soft, golden light that danced across the polished marble floors. Isabella stood at the center, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her heart racing with anticipation and anxiety. Today, the truth she had been sensing, the hidden thread that had quietly tied her to Lorenzo, would finally be revealed in its entirety. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a strange, exhilarating curiosity. Lorenzo entered the room quietly, his presence commanding yet gentle, like a tide of calm amidst the storm of emotions swirling inside her. His eyes met hers, and in that glance, there was a depth of understanding that no words could convey. "Isabella," he said softly, his voice carrying both warmth and gravity, "there is something you need to know about your family, about your place in all of this." She nodded, unable to speak, as though her voice had been stolen by the tension in the air. Lorenzo led her to a large desk where documents, photographs, and old letters lay spread before them. Each item was a piece of a puzzle that had been hidden for decades, carefully preserved, and now revealed to her. He pointed to a faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby, her eyes bright and protective. "This is your mother," he explained, "and this child." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. "This child is you." Shock rippled through Isabella, leaving her breathless. Her mind struggled to comprehend the truth, the realization that her life, her very existence, had been intertwined with the Vitale family all along. Questions swirled like a tempest in her mind. How had no one told her? Why had this been kept a secret? And most importantly, what did it mean for her now? Lorenzo stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly over the documents, not touching her, yet bridging the invisible distance between them. "You are the hidden heir, Isabella. You have a place here, a role that is yours by right, not by chance. I wanted to protect you, to prepare you, But now it is time for you to know." His words were steady, deliberate, yet beneath the surface, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of hope and relief. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes as she tried to process the enormity of the revelation. Part of her wanted to run, to escape the weight of a life she had never imagined, but another part felt a deep, almost magnetic pull toward the family she had never known. Her gaze shifted to Lorenzo, and she realized that he had not only brought her the truth, but had also offered her a chance to embrace her identity, to step into a world that was as dangerous as it was extraordinary. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and wonder. Lorenzo reached out, gently placing his hand near hers, not to claim, but to guide. "You can," he said with quiet conviction. "You have always been stronger than you realize, and you are not alone. I will be with you, and together, we will navigate whatever comes next." The moment stretched, filled with unspoken understanding, and Isabella felt a swell of emotion she had never known before. Shock gave way to curiosity, and curiosity blossomed into a cautious sense of belonging. The hidden threads of her life were slowly weaving themselves into a tapestry she was only beginning to see, one that promised both challenge and love. As the day wore on, Lorenzo took her through the history of the Vitale family, sharing stories of loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. Isabella listened intently, absorbing every detail, every lesson, and every warning. She began to understand that being the hidden heir was not just a matter of inheritance or status, but a responsibility that carried weight and demanded wisdom. Yet beneath the seriousness of it all, she also felt a quiet thrill at being a part of something larger than herself, a story that was finally hers to step into. By evening, as Isabella left the estate, her mind was a swirl of revelations, emotions, and possibilities. The city around her seemed different somehow, more vivid, more alive, as if it were welcoming her into a new chapter of life. She walked with a renewed sense of purpose, the knowledge of who she was now guiding her steps. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that this was only the beginning, that her connection with Lorenzo and the Vitale legacy would challenge her, transform her, and perhaps even teach her what it meant to truly belong. And in the quiet of the night, as Lorenzo watched her from a distance, he allowed himself a rare and guarded smile. The secret was finally out, the hidden heir revealed, and the journey they were destined to share was just beginning. Chapter 6. A world of danger. The city had taken on a different tone since Isabella's revelation. The streets buzzing with an energy that seemed both familiar and threatening. The morning sunlight glinted off the glass facades of buildings, but Lorenzo knew better than to trust appearances. Danger was never far from the Vitale family, and now that Isabella was known to him as the hidden heir, she was a target, whether she realized it or not. He had spent years shielding his family, walking a careful line between influence and survival, and now that line had shifted to include her safety above all else. Isabella, unaware of the full extent of the threat surrounding her, felt an unfamiliar tension coiling in her chest as she went about her day. There was a restlessness in the air, a whisper that something was stirring beyond the normal hum of city life. She found herself glancing over her shoulder, noticing shadows that seemed just a fraction too long, movements in the crowd that felt deliberate. Her connection with Lorenzo had deepened since the revelation, but now it carried a weight she could not yet comprehend. She understood that her life was no longer ordinary, yet she could not predict the dangers that lurked just beyond her perception. Lorenzo moved with calculated precision, ensuring that Isabella remained unaware of the threats, while subtly preparing for their eventual confrontation. He had trusted only a few loyal associates with the knowledge of her identity, and each step he took was carefully orchestrated to protect her without alarming her unnecessarily. As he watched her from a distance one afternoon, a pang of both protectiveness and admiration surged through him. She was brave, curious, and resilient in ways that even he had not anticipated. And he could see that their connection was deepening with every shared glance and every unspoken understanding. That evening, Lorenzo invited Isabella to a private dinner at a discreet location, away from prying eyes and the ever-watchful city. The space was quiet and intimate, the soft candlelight casting a warm glow on her features and illuminating the subtle tension in her posture. Isabella sensed that this meeting carried a gravity beyond the casual conversation they had shared before, and she felt a thrill mixed with apprehension as she followed him inside. "Isabella," he began gently, once they were seated, "there are people who will see your connection to the Vitale family as an opportunity. They will try to exploit it, and I need you to understand that danger is real, but it is not insurmountable." She listened intently, her eyes meeting his, and though the weight of his words was heavy, she felt a strange sense of determination rising within her. She had always believed in facing challenges directly, and now that courage would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. "I trust you," she said quietly, the words carrying more conviction than she realized. Over the course of the evening, Lorenzo explained the precautions they would take, the subtle ways they would navigate threats without drawing attention, and the importance of trust and communication. Isabella absorbed every detail, her mind racing with scenarios and strategies, yet she felt a newfound sense of empowerment. The danger was real, but so was the bond forming between them, a connection built on trust, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding that they would face the world together. As the night deepened and the city lights shimmered like distant stars, Isabella felt a growing closeness to Lorenzo, a realization that their connection was no longer merely chance or curiosity. It was a partnership forged in circumstance, strengthened by their shared courage and the unspoken promise to protect one another. She understood, with a mixture of awe and fear, that love and danger were intertwined in their lives, and that navigating one without the other was impossible. Lorenzo, watching her from across the table, felt a protective surge he could not contain. Each decision, each movement he had made to safeguard her had been worth it for this moment, this recognition that she was aware, capable, and resilient. He knew that the path ahead would be treacherous, but he also knew that together they could face whatever shadows lurked in the corners of the city. When the evening ended, and Isabella stepped out into the cool night air, she felt the city in a new light. Aware of both its beauty and its threats, she carried with her the knowledge that her life was changing irrevocably, and that every step she took would be guided by courage, trust, and the fragile yet unbreakable bond forming between her and Lorenzo. In that moment, she understood that danger was no longer something to fear alone, it was something they would face together, side by side, hearts and minds united against the shadows that sought to define their destiny. Chapter 7. Forbidden Hearts. First hints of autumn brushed the city with a golden hue, and the air carried a crispness that stirred both memory and longing. Isabella walked along the quiet riverbank, her thoughts heavy with the complexities of her new reality. She had embraced her identity as the hidden heir, but with that revelation came responsibilities she had never imagined, expectations she was still learning to navigate, and a growing awareness of the danger that lurked just beyond the surface. Every step she took seemed to echo with both freedom and constraint, the weight of her choices pressing gently yet persistently against her heart. Lorenzo had been by her side as much as circumstances, guiding her through the intricacies of the Vitale world while carefully revealing its power and its perils. Yet their closeness had begun to awaken feelings neither could ignore. Isabella found herself thinking of him at unexpected moments, remembering the warmth in his eyes, the subtle strength in his presence, and the rare vulnerability that peeked through the walls he had built around himself. She struggled with the duality of admiration and longing, knowing that the attraction between them was growing in a world where boundaries were dictated by duty and discretion. Lorenzo, for his part, wrestled with the same emotions. He had spent years mastering control, masking his desires, and prioritizing the family above all else. Yet Isabella had broken through those defenses with an ease he had not anticipated. Every glance, every shared word, every moment of quiet understanding deepened the pull he felt toward her. He knew that acting on his feelings could complicate their situation, blur the lines between responsibility and desire. Yet the thought of keeping her at a distance became increasingly unbearable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in shades of rose and amber, Lorenzo invited Isabella to a secluded garden within the Vitale estate. The space was quiet, almost secretive, filled with the scent of late-blooming flowers and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Isabella sensed the intimacy of the moment, her pulse quickening with anticipation and a hint of fear. She was acutely aware of the unspoken tension that had been building between them, a thread of connection charged with both longing and restraint. They walked slowly along the garden paths, side by side, the silence between them heavy yet comforting. Lorenzo finally spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of unspoken truths. "Isabella, I know this is complicated," he began, "more than either of us expected. But I cannot deny what I feel, even if it makes everything more difficult." Isabella looked at him, her own emotions mirrored in his gaze. She understood the danger, the expectations, and the delicate balance of their lives, yet she could not deny the pull of her heart. "I feel it too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what it means for us, or for everything else, but I cannot ignore it." The confession hung in the air, a fragile and delicate thing, both terrifying and liberating. For a moment, the garden felt like the only place in the world, a sanctuary where the pressures of duty, danger, and family could not intrude. They lingered in that silence, their hearts speaking in ways words could not capture, the boundaries of responsibility and desire intertwining with each step they took together. Yet even in that moment of intimacy, reality loomed nearby. Isabella's position as the hidden heir, Lorenzo's responsibilities as Don, and the ever-present threats of the Vitale world remained inescapable. Every stolen glance and tender gesture carried the weight of potential consequences, and both of them were painfully aware that their growing connection was something both beautiful and forbidden. By the time they left the garden, the first stars had begun to pierce the night sky, delicate points of light in the velvet darkness. Isabella felt a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension, knowing that the path of the heart was as perilous as any challenge they had faced together. Lorenzo, watching her, felt the same intensity, a quiet determination rising within him. He would protect her, guide her, and navigate the fragile and forbidden territory of their hearts with patience and care, knowing that love, even in the shadows, was worth every risk. In that quiet night, both of them understood that what they felt was real, undeniable, and dangerously compelling. Their hearts had found each other, but the world around them would test that bond in ways they had yet to imagine, shaping the course of their lives and the story that had only just begun. Chapter 8. Betrayal and Loyalty. Night air was heavy with tension, carrying a faint chill that seemed to mirror the unease gripping Isabella's heart. She had grown accustomed to the shadows that followed the Vitale family, the careful vigilance that Lorenzo demanded, yet nothing had prepared her for the sting of betrayal from within the very walls she had begun to call home. The revelation of her identity as the hidden heir had drawn her closer to the family, but it had also exposed her to dangers she had never imagined. Dangers that now arrived not only from rivals but from those she had trusted, that Lorenzo had sensed the undercurrent long before Isabella fully understood it. In the quiet hours of the estate, whispers and subtle glances had alerted him to a fissure in loyalty, a crack that threatened to widen if left unchecked. He moved with the precision and caution of a man who had navigated danger his entire life, yet the thought that Isabella, his hidden heir and the woman who had come to occupy his heart, could be harmed filled him with a rare and burning anger. Protecting her was no longer about guiding her through threats in the city. It was about shielding her from those who should have stood by her side. That evening, Isabella was summoned to the library under the pretense of a private discussion with Lorenzo. The room was dimly lit, the shelves casting long, mysterious shadows, and the quiet tick of a grandfather clock seemed unnaturally loud. She sensed immediately that something was wrong, the air charged with urgency and hidden emotion. Lorenzo's expression was taut, his usual calmness edged with concern, and she knew instinctively that the danger they had only imagined had become immediate and personal. "Isabella," Lorenzo began, his voice measured yet heavy with gravity, "there's been a breach of trust. Someone within the family has acted against us. I need you to understand that the world you are stepping into is fraught with complexities, and loyalty is often tested in ways that can hurt the ones we care about most." Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief. She had expected threats from outsiders, from rivals seeking to exploit her position as the hidden heir. But the idea that betrayal could come from someone she had trusted cut deeper than any external danger. The realization left her momentarily breathless, yet beneath the shock, a quiet determination began to take hold. She would not be passive in her own protection, and she would not allow fear to define her role within the family. As the evening unfolded, Lorenzo revealed the extent of the betrayal. Plans that should have remained secret had been leaked, strategies undermined, and the safety of the family, particularly Isabella, had been compromised. The revelation was sobering, yet it also strengthened the bond between them. Isabella realized that the connection she shared with Lorenzo was not merely emotional but essential, a lifeline in a world where trust could be both fragile and deadly. Together, they devised a careful plan to confront the traitor and safeguard those who could be harmed. Lorenzo's experience guided them, his meticulous attention to detail ensuring that every possible outcome was considered. Isabella, though still new to the intricacies of the Vitale world, contributed with insight and courage, her growing confidence and intelligence proving indispensable. The danger forced them to work closely, relying on each other completely, and in doing so, their bond deepened in ways that transcended fear and circumstance. By the time they had secured the immediate threat and restored a semblance of safety, the estate had settled into a tense quiet. Isabella stood beside Lorenzo, her hand brushing against his, in an unspoken gesture of solidarity. She felt the weight of the night's events, yet she also felt a newfound strength, an awareness that true loyalty and love were inseparable, and that sometimes the greatest threats could reveal the depth of those bonds. Lorenzo, watching her with both pride and protectiveness, understood that Isabella had stepped fully into her role as the hidden heir, not only by birthright but by courage and conviction. The trials they faced had not weakened them. They had forged a bond resilient enough to face whatever shadows remained. In that quiet moment, amidst the lingering tension of betrayal and danger, both of them recognized the truth of their connection. Love and loyalty were intertwined, and together they could withstand even the most treacherous of storms. Chapter 9. Love in the shadows. First light of dawn broke over the city, casting a pale glow on the streets that still hummed with the remnants of night. Isabella and Lorenzo had barely slept, their thoughts and words intertwined as they assessed the aftermath of the recent betrayal. The danger they had narrowly escaped lingered like a shadow over their lives, but amidst the tension and fatigue, a new clarity had begun to emerge. The trials they had faced together had revealed not only the strength of their bond, but also the depth of their feelings, unspoken yet undeniable. Isabella sat by the window of her room in the Vitale estate, staring out at the awakening city, her mind replaying the events that had brought them to this point. Every near miss, every whispered threat, every moment of fear had been tempered by Lorenzo's presence. by his quiet strength and unwavering protection. She felt an unfamiliar, but comforting certainty that they were connected in ways that transcended the dangers surrounding them. A part of her had always longed for belonging, for someone who understood the intricacies of her life without judgment, and she now realized that she had found that in Lorenzo. Lorenzo approached silently, his presence a familiar anchor in the whirlwind of her thoughts. He did not speak immediately, simply standing behind her with a hand resting lightly on the back of the chair. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. A silent reassurance that he was there, steadfast and unwavering. Isabella turned to meet his gaze, and in that instant, the world outside faded into insignificance. The distance that had always existed between them, born of duty and circumstance, seemed to dissolve, leaving only the raw truth of their connection. "I thought I might lose you," Lorenzo admitted quietly, his voice steady yet tinged with emotion. "The last few days, they made me realize how fragile everything can be, and how much you mean to me." Isabella reached out, her hand brushing against his, tentative yet full of intention. "I've never felt more aware of what's important," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I've always known danger was part of your world, but now I understand it differently. And I know I want to face it with you." The words, though gentle, carried an intensity that settled between them like a quiet flame. They moved closer, the distance narrowing with each heartbeat, until the barriers of hesitation and restraint dissolved completely. Lorenzo cupped her face with a tenderness that belied the strength he wielded in the world outside. And Isabella leaned into his touch, letting herself surrender to the safety and warmth he offered. The kiss that followed was slow, deliberate, and unhurried. A promise of trust and love forged in the crucible of shared danger and unwavering loyalty. For a long moment, they held each other, letting the unspoken emotions settle into their hearts. The world outside continued its relentless rhythm, but within the quiet of the Vitale estate, they found solace in one another. Each glance, each gentle touch, reinforced the realization that their love was no longer forbidden or tentative. It was a bond strengthened by trials, tempered by fear, and deepened by the unbreakable trust that had grown between them. As the day unfolded, Isabella and Lorenzo moved through the estate together, their interactions effortless yet charged with meaning. Small gestures, fleeting touches, and shared smiles became a language of their own, an affirmation that despite the shadows of the world outside, they were united in a love that neither danger nor duty could diminish. The connection between them was no longer subtle. It was undeniable, a steady light in a life that had once been uncertain and fragmented. By evening, the city lights began to sparkle like distant stars, and Isabella and Lorenzo found themselves once again in the quiet garden where their hearts had first acknowledged the depth of their feelings. They walked side by side, hand in hand, knowing that the path ahead would not always be safe or easy, but certain that they would face it together. In the shadows, they had found love, a love that was resilient, unwavering, and capable of withstanding every challenge the world might present. And as the night deepened, Isabella rested her head against Lorenzo's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the warmth of his presence. In the shadows, they had discovered not only each other, but also the unshakable truth that love, when nurtured with trust and courage, could flourish even in the most perilous of circumstances. Chapter 10. A new dawn. First light of morning spilled gently over the Vitale estate, painting the gardens and grand halls with a soft, golden hue that seemed to promise renewal. Isabella stood at the balcony, the breeze lifting strands of her hair and carrying the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. For the first time in weeks, perhaps even months, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The trials, the betrayals, and the dangers that had haunted her life since learning the truth of her identity as the hidden heir had begun to recede, leaving space for clarity, hope, and a future she could embrace fully. Lorenzo appeared beside her, his presence as steady and grounding as ever. He did not speak at first, simply allowing them both to take in the calm of the morning. His hand found hers, a natural and unspoken gesture of solidarity and love. Isabella turned to him with a small smile, feeling the weight of past fears and the intensity of recent trials melting in the warmth of their shared trust. "It feels different today," she murmured, her voice carrying both relief and quiet joy. "It does," Lorenzo replied, his eyes reflecting the soft sunlight. "Everything feels possible now. We've faced danger, betrayal, and uncertainty. Together, we've survived, and we've found each other in the process." He squeezed her hand gently, and in that touch was the promise of unwavering commitment. The kind of bond that could not be broken by circumstance or fear. The Vitale family had gathered in the main hall, the atmosphere unusually light for such a storied and powerful household. The conflicts that had once threatened to fracture them had been resolved with careful diplomacy and a renewed sense of unity. Rivals had been pacified, alliances strengthened, and the estate now hummed with the quiet certainty that the family's legacy was secure. Isabella, once an outsider, had been fully embraced, not just as Lorenzo's hidden heir, but as a vital and cherished member of a family whose loyalty was as deep as the challenges they faced together. As the morning progressed, Lorenzo and Isabella walked through the gardens, speaking softly about the days ahead, about the responsibilities Isabella would assume, and about the freedom they had finally earned to acknowledge their love openly. The sunlight caught her hair and the sparkle in her eyes, and Lorenzo felt a swell of pride and affection. The hidden heir, once unaware of her place in this world, now stood fully in her power and identity, ready to face the future with courage and determination. Later, as the city beyond the estate awakened, Isabella and Lorenzo stood at the estate gates, hand in hand, looking out over the streets that had once felt distant, overwhelming, and full of uncertainty. Now the city seemed alive with promise, each passing figure a reminder that life continued, and that they would continue together, unafraid of the shadows that had once pursued them. Their hearts, once cautious and burdened by secrecy, were now free to embrace love, trust, and the shared journey ahead. In that quiet moment, Lorenzo leaned down and brushed his lips against Isabella's, a kiss full of tenderness, relief, and unspoken promises. "This is our beginning," he whispered, his voice steady and warm. "No more hiding, no more fear. We step forward together." Isabella rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the warmth of his presence. The hidden heir had found her place, not only in the Vitale family, but in the heart of the man who had guided, protected, and loved her through every shadow and uncertainty. Together, they faced a future built on trust, courage, and the enduring strength of their love. As the sun climbed higher, casting its full light over the estate and the city beyond, Isabella and Lorenzo walked forward, side by side, into the promise of a new dawn. The world was vast and uncertain, but in each other, they had found a sanctuary, a love that would endure, and a life finally theirs to shape together. Their hearts, once hidden and cautious, now beat in unison, ready to meet every sunrise with hope, courage, and the quiet joy of love realized at last.